Tubbs would crank his radio. I mean, the music was thumping. It was really so loud it almost got, deafening. Well, it was for me. I was in the back seat and he had like these big ass speakers and subwoofers and stuff.
Gonzo, the Coast Guard years. Key West, episode 4, Cruising and Christmas.
After the initial shock or perhaps disappointment of being a garbage collector, I eventually got into a sort of daily routine. I found myself hanging out way more often with Brooklyn than I was Rubiano or anyone else, actually. The daily routine was pretty much breakfast, barracks, canvas the base, and occasionally do something really cool, like sweep the outdoor walkways in front of all the rooms. Yeah, so I'm being a little facetious here. I mean, it was just so much ridiculous busy work that we did, which if I had to think about it, we were essentially the building maintenance, the custodial engineers, if you will, which is to say we were the janitors of the building. I'm not sure this was the future I had envisioned for myself. Was it exactly the particular kind of challenging work that I thought I'd be doing? I mean, we were just your basic manual labor. After a morning of building maintenance, we would all meet back in the lobby where they would eventually dismiss us to go to lunch. It wasn't long before I stopped going to lunch at the chow hall because, well, the food sort of sucked and the cook was an ass. I actually started ordering a small pepperoni and extra cheese pizza from Domino's, like daily. Brooklyn and I would go up to my room and wait for the pizza. I usually tried ordering it just before our lunch break, so it would arrive by the time our lunch break came. Now, granted, this wasn't the best use of my money, but they also brought a 2-liter bottle of Coke and sometimes Sprite if I asked for that instead. I mean, there'd always be some left over, something to drink, that is. I mean, Brooklyn and I would inhale the pizza. So one of my roommates or myself or Brooklyn would finish drinking the soda. I mean, it didn't seem like a really big deal at the time, but it was strange that after a few weeks, the folks at Domino's knew exactly who was calling when the order got placed. I was a regular for Domino's delivery. I mean, I didn't know that was a thing, but before you know it, I kept on calling, and eventually they would throw in like extra stuff, like, hey, we have this extra medium-sized pizza that the order got canceled. We thought you'd want it. And so they'd bring me that. And that was always kind of cool. I'm not sure that was a sanctioned thing, but it turned out pretty good. Truthfully, I had never actually been to a Domino's when I was back in Virginia. My parents always took us to Pizza Hut. And I'll admit, I was never a fan of Pizza Hut, like ever. Mostly because I didn't like the pan pizza, because that's what my parents always got us, and I couldn't stand it. It was always a pan pizza supreme. It was like the shit on it that I couldn't stand. Like, who the fuck eats green peppers on a pizza? Ugh. Oh my God. Anyway, okay, I'm going off on a tangent. I found that I was a fan, though, of Domino's pepperoni and extra cheese. In addition to going to Domino's a lot, I'd also acquired a taste for Fritos and jalapeno cheese dip. That cheese dip, that Fritos branded one that comes in a can that has like that metal lid on it that's so damn sharp. If you're not careful, you cut your finger off with it. Yes, I had cut myself several times with it. It was like, so there was like cheese and blood all over the place. It was disgusting. But anyway, so I used to get, or usually try to get, the Fritos corn chips dip size ones. They were like the big, huge Fritos, and they were freaking awesome. I was lucky because right outside the back gates, to the left of the street, was a convenience store, and they always carried them. It was freaking awesome. It was also the place, that convenience store, that I found out that I could buy beer, and so that was cool too. An interesting thing about living in Key West, Florida, I mean, besides being away from Virginia and all the kind of new experiences that I was having, I mean, Duval Street and basically just starting to understand beach life that was all kind of cool. I mean, I never actually thought of myself as a beach person. But But hey, it was a thing, right? Beach people are a thing or something like that. One night, I think it was an evening that Brooklyn was on watch. Watch was basically somebody had to sit at the barracks lobby for a few hours, or it might have been 24/7. I don't know. But anyway, basically all he did was sit. That's all he did was sit at the lobby. Yeah, it was the worst. There's nothing much to do. I don't even know if he got up and made rounds around the building. We may have. I don't remember. But so while he was out doing that, there was always something else to do. And in this particular night, I was introduced to the term cruising, or whatever they called it. So Rubiano eventually had come by my room that evening and asked if I wanted to hang out. I'm like, sure, what else did I have going on? I mean, except I had a nearly empty bag of chips and an empty can of jalapeno cheese dip. I mean, I had that to keep me company. But anyway, so I thought that perhaps hanging out with him might be a better option. So we headed down to the parking lot, the barracks parking lot. Rubiano took me over to a white car. I mean, it might have been like a Toyota Supra or maybe a Toyota Celica or something like that. But either way, it was kind of a sporty white car, though all the windows were blacked out. I mean, you really did need blacked out windows in Key West. Otherwise, that the sun would beat through and it would cook you, even with the AC on. I mean, because it was really tough. Sun was intense. But anyway, sitting in the car was a dude in the driver's seat. He was another coastie, and he was a coastie with a car, though. So if you had a car, that was a big deal, especially among the non-rates. A non-rate in the Coast Guard is a coastie without a rate, which means you didn't have a designation. You weren't, like a bosun's mate or something like that, or a subsistence specialist, a cook. So you didn't have a real assigned job yet. We were all like that. As a matter of fact, when you get out of Coast Guard boot camp, there's a couple of things. You could get a guaranteed location or a guaranteed school. And that all of that was contingent upon, I think, your ASVAB score. But I think I talked about that in the boot camp season 1. Anyway, so I don't remember the guy's name. So we're going to call him Tubbs, like Ricardo Tubbs from the TV show Miami Vice that was back in the late 80s. This dude Tubbs, he was kind of cool. I showed up. He told me to hop in the back. Rubio got into the front passenger seat and we took off. So Rubiano introduced me to Tubbs, and I don't remember what he did, Tubbs that is. But I think he was attached to one of the ships that was moored to the pier on the Coast Guard base. He might have been on one of the 82-footers. I don't remember. But we took off and we headed toward the main gate because you couldn't drive out the back gate. He turned his blacked out car in the direction of Duval Street. By this time, I had already sort of been up and down Duval Street on foot, in the daytime and in the nighttime. But I had actually not been in a car and hadn't cruised Duval Street yet. It was a totally different experience. It was interesting, to say the least. It looked like something out of one of those cheesy sort of cop movies where you see a bunch of cars going up and down the street when all the lights were on in the buildings. I mean, the buildings weren't very tall. I don't think they're more than like 3 stories all along Duval Street. But there's lots of lights going on, different colors and stuff like that, and especially sort of the blingy lights outside of the Copa. But anyway, it was just sort of like out of a cheesy movie. But we thought we were pretty damn cool. At least back then, we thought we were cool. Tubbs would crank his radio. I mean, the music was thumping. It was really so loud it almost got, deafening. Well, it was for me. I was in the back seat, and he had like these big ass speakers and subwoofers and stuff in the trunk. So yeah, it was pretty rough. But anyway, we were cruising, going super slow. Windows are rolled up. Nobody could actually see in, but we thought we were badasses. I don't get that. I mean, but hell, I was 19, and that's what 19-year-old kids do, right? I mean, all we did was drive up and down Duval Street, drive super slow behind the car in front of us that was doing the exact same thing. I mean, occasionally Tubbs would stop because he would see somebody he knew, or there was some hot chick that, he wanted to talk to. And here's the funny thing. We actually thought, or Tubbs thought, he might have a chance with one of these girls, which is why he'd stop. Because who knows? I mean, I'm kind of glad, because if any girls actually got in the car, they probably would have kicked me out in the street, and I'd had to walk home, and that would be like not cool. Because sitting in the back seat when you're cruising really isn't like the best place to be, because it kind of shows your order in the ranking as far as the group that was there. But whatever. I was being chauffeured around. It was kind of cool. Speaking of cool, so every car at least one point or another was playing that song, Push It by Salt and Pepper. Now, I know you're probably like singing that song in your head right now, so might as well say you're welcome and thank you very much for your graciousness. And if you haven't heard that song, please look it up. Push It by Salt and Pepper. That song's a classic. Anyway, but everybody played it at least once. You always heard it going up and down Duval Street. And so anyway, it was really fun. So like I had said before, occasionally Tubbs would stop and he would talk to some chick and, just kept talking about how he was going to try to get some action that night. But the few times that I'd actually been cruising with Tubbs and Rubiano, it was always the same thing. We always ended up exactly the same way we started out. Just the three of us. I mean, no one was getting any action, which was okay by me. I mean, cruising her up and down the boardwalk, cruising up and down Duval Street was, what else was I going to do? I mean, it was great just killing time. I mean, usually all I had was a half a bag of Frito dip-sized chips and jalapeno dip waiting for me back in my room. So, this was a better alternative. We would cruise around for like an hour or so, and eventually we'd just head back to the base, and we'd park our car, and that would be it. Yeah, so we did that, a few times. I couldn't remember how many times we actually did it, but it was fun. Again, cruising up and down Duval Street was just a totally different experience. I had forgotten it was the holiday season. I mean, it's easy to forget when it's hot as shit outside. The things that are normally around seem to not be apparent in Key West as far as holiday reminders. At least I don't think I ever noticed them. I admit to being oblivious to a lot of things then in my life, and clearly now at this point in my life, there's a lot of things I'm totally oblivious to. I'm not, so I can't blame old age. Sadly, I think I'm still fairly oblivious. Yeah, it's okay. As Christmas approached, it was becoming apparent that this would be my first holiday away from my family. I had spent my birthday in boot camp, but that's not actually a holiday, but it's all good, right? Although my birthday probably should be a holiday, but that's a whole different story. I mean, I can go on a whole tangent about that, but I will spare you all that. So I think I remember that Christmas fell on a Friday in December 1987. And as far as I was particularly concerned, it was a day like any other day. Around 4-ish, I had headed over to the chow hall to eat dinner. And as I got to the building, something seemed a little off. It was super quiet. The lights were off. You could see that the dining hall was empty, at least from the lights that were coming in from the windows. The kitchen was dark. No banging of pots and pans, like none of that noise that you expected to hear from a commercial dining facility. I was like, shit, I had missed that the base gallery or galley was closed today. Shit. I mean, at least dinner time it was closed, or I don't know what happened. I missed out. I wasn't paying attention to something. Somebody said something, and I was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? And I didn't even make any arrangements for any type of other food. However, what I did have, which I almost always had, and you guessed it, a bag of Fritos and cheese dip. I also managed to have a bottle of Jamaican rum. I mean, I don't even remember where that bottle came from, but a bottle of Jamaican rum always seemed to like magically appear in the room. It was kind of cool. So I left the dining hall and acted like I wasn't fazed by the complete screw up on my part. I went back to my room, grabbed my chips and dip, a bottle of rum, flopped down onto 2 chairs, sat down on one and propped my feet up on the other. And that was pretty much it. At this point, I figured that I wasn't going to be starving tonight. It wasn't the Christmas meal I expected to be having. But, so I don't remember if Dave was around. He might have been underway or I don't know what he was doing. Rob, I think I'd invited to somebody else's house. Somebody's place. I don't know. So he wasn't around that evening either. So it was just me, pretty much flying solo on Christmas Day. After eating most of the bag of chips and killing off the entire can of jalapeno cheese dip, I took my turn at the rum. It was the dark rum, by the way. Jamaican rum was dark rum that I remember. I didn't have anything to mix it with. I just sort of, drank it straight out of the bottle. Neat, as they would say. So yeah, that was it. I didn't even have any cups either, which I don't ever remember if we actually had cups ever in that room. We probably did, but yeah, anyway. So things had started to get back to normal after Christmas. At least as normal as they can get for Key West, Florida. A couple of days later, I think after Christmas, Brooklyn had stopped by my room and told me he'd heard a rumor about a new boot that was coming, and it was a female. So when that happens, like every dude in the Coast Guard starts to pay attention because it's like a big deal when a chick shows up. Now, I vaguely sort of remember that he had said that this boot coming in was in the boot camp company before mine. I mean, after mine. So they were in the class behind me. And but she had stayed after boot camp graduation to attend BEEP, BEEB, which I think that's how you spell it, which is essentially additional sort of classroom training so people can improve their ASVAB score and then, try to get a different job or a job in the Coast Guard, go to one of the A schools. So anyway, I think he said he saw her during that. So I think the person that he was describing was also someone that I thought I knew, or at least I recognized. He described her as the girl who came to boot camp in white boots that had like the tassels off the back of them. And they were like ankle high boots. And I almost immediately remembered who that was. Because during boot camp, I remember that there was always a new class showing up. I think on a Monday, and usually by Tuesday morning, you're still seeing them outside of Monroe Hall at Cape May in their civilian clothes. And I remember seeing a female recruit with white boots with the little white tassels on it. I wasn't 100% positive, but I was pretty sure. I mean, you couldn't forget those boots. I mean, they were like right there. So as with all rumors, the new boot showing up would be like the gossip for the longest time, especially among the junior enlisted. I mean, it was like fucking high school all over again. People wouldn't stop talking about this new person that was showing up. I mean, then again, most of us had not been out of high school all that long. So I guess it's sort of, expected, right? But the rumor sort of just kind of went around for a while, and we went about our normal sort of daily routine, and which was, canvassing the base. So one of the times that we were canvassing the base, we were headed over toward where the Coast Guard cutters were. So like I said previously, there were some 82 footers and some 205 foot, or just called 205s, Coast Guard cutters. There was the cutter Lipan, and the cutter Ute. Anyway, those are the two larger ones that were in port there. And they were moored up right by that seawall. So I don't know if any of you ever be at the Coast Guard base in Key West, Florida, but they were moored right by the seawall. And I actually remember spending quite a few nights sitting on the seawall, and you got a good view of the sunset sitting there, and it was kind of quiet, more quiet than Mallory Square ever was. So it was kind of a cool place to hang out. But while we were strolling along the base, picking up palm leaves and trash, a car was pulling up, I think, to our right and heading in the direction we were walking. Again, we were walking toward, in this case, I think it was the Lipan that was the one in port. And as the car came alongside of us, I glanced over. It was a Coast Guard officer, a commander. I mean, you can tell it was a commander by the silver oak leaf things on collar devices that he had on his collar. That sounded a little bit redundant. The driver looked over and slowed to a stop. And under normal circumstances, you're supposed to stop and salute, greet the officer, and say something like, "Good morning, Commander," blah, 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 blah. However, this was not a normal circumstance. Almost nothing that happened to me in the Coast Guard was normal, but this was definitely not the norm. When I looked over and made eye contact with the driver of this car, the officer, I distinctly remember that I got a stupid grin on my face, and I think I looked over and I saw Brooklyn. He almost shit himself, and I yelled out, "Hey, Uncle John!" I walked over to the car, put my hands on the door, and leaned in to talk to him. He told me about my parents had told him that I was there now, and asked how I was getting along. So we chatted for just a few brief moments. He pulled out a piece of paper and wrote down some stuff on it. It turned out that it was his home address over on Truman Annex and his home phone number and his house phone. Back then, people had house phones. No one had cell phones unless you were a drug dealer. And that definitely was not Uncle John. So he told me that I needed to come on over and hang out, or just come over for dinner or whatever. Just stop by the house, which was kind of cool. I mean, I probably was going to get a decent meal out of it, and I definitely told him I would call or just come over, because with this particular family, although calling ahead would be a great idea, most of them just accepted the fact that you could just show up unannounced. So he said bye. He had to go. He had to, get ready for the ship's morning muster. And so as he drove off, Brooklyn and I were about ready to walk away. And then we heard some people yelling from the bow of the Lipan, like screaming at us. And I remember one of them yelling over something like, "Hey, assholes, do you know who that was? That was our CO. You're supposed to salute him. Next time, you better show some fucking respect." I do vaguely remember feeling a little cocky and yelling something back like, "Yeah, I know exactly who that is." And then I kind of turned and walked off like my shit didn't stink. I mean, before we had gotten too far from the Lipan, Brooklyn just looked over and said, "He's your uncle? Really? What the hell?" We kept on walking for a bit, and I told him not to say anything. And I gave him a short recap of who Uncle John was to the family, and that I had known him since I was a little kid, and how my parents used to come visit him and his family in Key West, Florida. And by the way, they used to leave us as teenagers back at the house when they would go down to visit Uncle John in Key West. So anyway, but I'd asked, Brooklyn not to tell anybody about this guy, because that would be really weird that he and I, had known each other since I was a little kid. It was also a bit cool knowing that had the poo ever hit the fan, that I had somebody to help support to get me out of it. So there was one time a few years later that Uncle John getting involved in a situation because my parents had called him, ended up making the situation completely worse. But it was not his fault at all. It was literally just some people sticking their nose in other people's businesses, and it made my life difficult for a little while. But everything turned out okay in the end, so no big deal. I will be talking about that in future episodes, just not this one. So I had mentioned that this was still like around Christmas time or just after Christmas time. I had received a letter in the mail. Now, I didn't receive mail all that often, and actually most of us did not get mail all that often. Yes, I know you're thinking, oh, that's so sad. Well, okay, so again, it probably is sad, but whatever. I mean, most of us had joined the Coast Guard either to get away from our families or just didn't have anything, back home to keep us there or something like that. We all had reasons for leaving. So not getting mail is probably not the worst thing for us. I'm not entirely sure exactly when this letter came. It might have been just before New Year's or might have been just after New Year's, but it fits better in the timeline to tell you about it, assuming it came before New Year's, because then there's a whole thing about, New Year's on Duval Street. So the letter shows up, and I remember Brooklyn was in my room, and he was sitting on in one of the two chairs, and I think I was on the floor. I mean, he might have been on the floor too. We might have just been hanging out, listening to music. And the letter was in a letter size envelope. And so I'm not going to tell you who the letter was from, but if the person is listening to this podcast, they'll know exactly who they are. But anyway, so I opened up the letter, and when I reached in, it took out the actual letter itself, something else fell out as I pulled the letter out. Brooklyn yelled out in like his Brooklyn accent, "Is that a condom?" I'm like, it's an empty condom wrapper, actually. And then we're both thinking the same thing. Someone got laid. Or maybe that was just some weird accident that an empty condom wrapper got put in this letter. But as it turns out, that's not exactly how things went down. So Brooklyn was a little bit more patient than me. He was barking for me to read the fucking letter. So I'm like, okay, hold on, dude. I'm just getting there. Just chill the fuck out. There wasn't much actually in the letter. And I'm trying not to paraphrase too much, but I can almost remember this part, verbatim. And it said in the letter, and I quote, "Santa came on Christmas Eve. I came on Christmas Day. I'm no longer the big V." And that was pretty much all there was. And after a brief moment of silence, Brooklyn and I were howling laughing. We were high-fiving each other, celebrating the guy who wrote the letter. I mean, it was the funniest damn thing. We hadn't heard anything that funny in a while, but holy cow, it was hysterical. I mean, the next thing you know, we're breaking out like the bottle of Jamaican rum again. We're taking celebratory swigs out of it and hooping and hollering and high-fiving again and, gyrating our hips going, "Woo, yeah, buddy, yeah." And we were acting like it was our accomplishment. It was fucking hilarious. I mean, yeah, that's clearly we were living our life through somebody else's Christmas Day gift. I mean, how funny is that? Santa came on Christmas Eve. I came on Christmas Day. Merry Christmas!
You've been listening to Gonzo the Coast Guardiers Key West, written and produced by Tim Gonzalez, and I'm Nicholas Gonzalez, the voice guy. Join us next week for another episode of Gonzo the Coast Guardiers.